Well, in many respects, White Oaks became the front door for Furman University, in that it was one of the first places that all of the freshmen were to visit as a group. And it was the public face of Furman in that every year, over 100 events are hosted at White Oaks. Most of them university events, but also events on behalf of Greenville organizations and Greenville charities. So literally thousands of people circulate through White Oaks and its beautiful grounds each year, not only learning about Furman, but also learning about White Oaks and about the Daniel bequest. So over the years, I think it's safe to say that we, along with others within the Furman community, tried to humanize White Oaks. And probably the foremost example of that is the annual freshman picnic that occurs at White Oaks. The 700 some odd freshmen are shuttled out here from campus on buses. So we solicited volunteers among the orientation staff, the so-called O staff, and these are mostly sophomores. And they readily agreed, and they positioned themselves in the various rooms around the house. But over the years, we began to realize that the sophomores developed a mythic ritual in that as they welcomed the freshmen into each room, they developed increasingly elaborate stories about what supposedly happened here in White Oaks over the years after the Daniels moved in. And with each passing year, they told incredibly outrageous stories and tales about what supposedly happened in this house, that it was haunted, that the former presidents of Furman's ashes are in the urns above the mantel, that Mary Poppins was filmed here, that the Daniels had a daughter who committed suicide by jumping off the 3rd floor. Unfortunately, the stories became so outlandish that the freshmen, naive as they were, accepted them at face value. And many of them that very evening rushed to call home and tell their parents about this haunted house where Furman's president lives. We also developed an annual routine of inviting a student, or 2 students, senior students, to live in the guest cottage by the pool. And those students became part of our extended family and also helped us out on various occasions when we had special events and banquets and so forth, parties at White Oaks. We also created what we call the concierge, the White Oaks concierge team. And these were student volunteers who would help us orchestrate big events, whether it was trustee dinners or large parties for alumni. We would have 10 or 12 students who readily volunteered. In fact, we had so many wanting to do it that we had to turn them away. But they too became part of the extended White Oaks experience and part of the Shy family. We had a number of students who actually had a passionate interest in organizing social events and in preparing the food. And a number of our student volunteers were especially talented at food preparation and event management. And several of them have gone on to have very promising careers in those fields as a result. And the student gatherings were always the favorite. And we would invite the Bell Tower Boys. Do they still exist?
Yes.
They would perform Christmas carols here for the students. And they very creatively transformed the Mr. Grinch song into President Shy. Very funny, very entertaining. Students loved it.
Wow.
Very good spoof of the president. Well, the Furman president has the benefit of having great support. both staff support, faculty support, student support, and alumni support. And we had a White Oaks team. That is, we had a woman named Barbara Kamenetsky, who was the inside staff member at White Oaks, who helped prepare the house for all of the public functions that it provides. And then we had an outside team of gardeners and handymen who took care of the grounds. At the same time, Susan Shy, as First Lady of Furman, assumed primary responsibility for coordinating and organizing the events at White Oaks. And so she did a fantastic job preparing for literally scores of events every year, whether it was a small luncheon with a donor or with a visitor, or it was an event on behalf of the community where we might have 1,000 people here. She was primarily responsible for organizing, planning, and coordinating the events. My role was to show up and smile. And, several years after I became president, I suggested that the dozen or so colleges and universities that were beneficiaries of the Daniels philanthropy, that we produce a book honoring the Daniels. And all of them readily agreed, and we did so. And the process of producing that book necessarily generated a lot more information about the Daniel family, about White Oaks, and about their commitment to philanthropy. When Mr. and Mrs. Daniel still lived here, they hosted then Vice President Richard Nixon. And we call one of the bedrooms upstairs where he slept the Nixon bedroom. Probably the most interesting structural feature of White Oaks is the hidden staircase. And I love to alert students that there was indeed such a hidden aspect to White Oaks. Even though the students later would embellish that with fictitious stories about the role of the hidden staircase, it actually is part of the main staircase in the foyer. That is, up on the second level, there's a door along the turning staircase with a private staircase down into the kitchen. And it was designed for the purpose of allowing the serving staff, when the Daniels were hosting parties, to be able to go up and down between the main floor and the second floor without interrupting the party. So it was intended for serving purposes. Another secret aspect of White Oaks that few people know about because it's hidden in the bowels of the basement is a huge walk-in bank vault. Oh. And when we moved in 1994, we discovered that inside the bank vault was a room about 8 feet by 12 feet in dimensions. And in it were cases of wine and champagne that the Daniels had accumulated over the years. In addition, there was a gallon mason jar of moonshine that somehow the Daniels had acquired. We don't know the story of how or why. And also dozens of bottles of old whiskey dating back to the 1920s. The most interesting of which was called Ye Old Puritan whiskey. White Oaks was a magisterial gift to Furman from Mrs. Daniel after her death. And she was farsighted enough not only to leave the home to the university, but to leave a substantial endowment to subsidize the expense of operating the home. It is a perfect location for the social events that Furman's president necessarily hosts. And we were able to make effective use of it not only on behalf of the extended Furman family, but also on behalf of the greater Greenville community.